There you go. Well, welcome to those of you who are coming online and those who are joining us again. There are some people here, about four people here, and including Heather, who's joining us in our home. It's a beautiful, special day here in Royal. Certainly this time of the year is the best time of the year. Easter, just after Easter, 1 month before we really get into the winter. So no wind, sun at a nice angle, sun's coming in here quite pleasantly. What good conditions for Bible study.
32 degrees in Cape Town.
So, and 32 degrees in Cape Town apparently. So good conditions, we've got no excuse. I'm glad, well, we could be, I suppose, somewhere else, but it's really good that we can give this hour and a half or so together to study the Bible. We know that Christians are commanded to search the scriptures. Jesus said we must search the scriptures, which is more than just a cursory glance or going through the pages. We must search the Bible and study the Bible and live the Bible. And if you are familiar with the Bible, or at least getting familiar with the Bible, you'll understand that it demands no less than that. The very nature of the Bible requires close analysis and thought and pondering, meditation, comparing Old Testament, New Testament, understanding the flow and the grain of each book, etc. So really good that we can have this time together this morning as we get into chapter 18. So this is where we're going for the time this morning. Let me just say two things. I know some of you have asked for the notes, so I will send you again the notes for chapter 18. Tom here asked for them. I've just realized this morning. So after this, I will send you out the notes. There are one or two people who have mentioned that. Please pray for the completion of this project and also for a good publisher. Somebody has sent me a whole lot of different Christian publishers where you can submit a book or something that you want to write. So that's why I've taken them down, because I really want to publish this at an affordable price too, for people particularly in Africa, not just for a market overseas. So please pray that God's Spirit would guide and be with me in this project and also reduce the margin of error. That's what I pray for. We humans, we are fallible, and I make no pretensions that what I'm saying is infallible or absolute truth, but I do believe that we can reduce the margin of error more. We can reduce we can't just throw up our hands and say, well, we'll never know, and we can just be skeptical, we can never know the truth. No, we can know the truth, and we can come closer to the truth. So I really pray that what I'm writing and what I'm saying to you is by the grace of God coming closer to the truth, and then handing it over to the next generation, other people, and they can hopefully build upon whatever is true and chuck away whatever is erroneous or wrong. So please pray for that. The other thing I'll just quickly get in here, this coming Saturday, some of you know have received already a Zoom link. I'm going to do a talk here this Saturday at 10 o'clock, because it's the 500-year anniversary when Martin Luther took his stand and said, here I stand, and held to what he believed was true before the authorities of the day. And that was a real watershed moment in the Protestant Reformation that changed Europe totally. It changed Europe. And behind the great changes of Europe always comes back to one sort of champion of the Bible. That was Martinus Luther. And so we're going to be having that. If you haven't got the link and want to get that, just email me, or there are a few people that are coming here, not many. You're welcome to join us in our home here for about an hour and a half and a talk of Martin Luther 500 years later. So, well, let's get into this particular chapter 18. So that's where we are in our Bibles. We've been giving you quite a sort of, last week I felt was a bit like a short cocktail. It was dense and rich. There's a lot in this, and this particular chapter is a bit longer, chapter 18, and it contains also a lot of detail and content within this particular chapter. Let me remind you where we are now, just to get our bearings with this particular chapter. We are looking at the description and decimation and the lamentation and celebration of the great prostitute who is called Babylon. So that's where we are in chapter 17 and chapter 18. We're looking at last week we saw the description, this and the decimation. This week we're going to look at chapter 18, which is all about the destruction of this city, and then about the lamentation, of the city, the lamentation, and then the celebration also after that. Just going to move this down a little bit. All right, I think that might help. Yeah, that helps a bit better. Just we haven't got the lights action camera that is happening here. I'm going to stick to some of my notes a bit more. And yes, we are busy recording there. So we ended off last week by looking at this great city, Babylon, who is really the queen bee in the nations. The queen bee. If you do beekeeping, it might be a good picture for you. And all this hive of activity, international activity that is around this queen bee of Babylon. Like any beehive, or most beehives are propped up or supported on something. And we saw this queen bee was propped up by the animal with their 7 heads and 10 horns. And all the nations are coming to her as a service provider for business because they want the wealth and the prestige and the good life that she offers. And we ended off last week by noting at the end of chapter 17 that it's very surprising that at the end she comes to a sudden and severe demise. She is thrown off, as it were. The animal throws her off, tramples on her with the 10 horns. They gore her to death, and then they eat her flesh. And that's how it ends, with this great demise of the prostitute Babylon. And chapter 18 is really going to be all about the aftershock of that particular fall. The sudden and severe fall of this city Babylon by the animal, what he did. This chapter 18, is going to be telling you about the great effects of that and the lamentations and explain why God has judged that city in that particular way. So chapter 18 is linked into the last few verses of chapter 17 that is going to give some more attention to the detail of her great fall and of the great demise. This city Babylon, what I've done for you in the notes that I can send to you is in the beginning of my notes, for those of you who've read them, I have something called background readings for that, background readings. And in doing the research and preparation for this, it struck me how the portfolio, both of the nature of this woman as the sort of world city and also of her fall and demise and the lamentation, people crying out in sorrow that all the businesses come to an end, is a lot of it is taken from the Old Testament descriptions of the fall of Tyre and the fall of Babylon, the great Neo-Babylonian empire under Nebuchadnezzar. Both of Tyre and of Babylon, those prophecies that have come to a fulfillment here in this description of the great fall of the city. So this is something that is not just predominant here in Revelation. This fall of the city is something which the Bible gives a lot of time and attention for when it looks at the nations of the world, particularly the great power, super city Babylon, and also of Tyre. And if you have your Bible, you can turn to Ezekiel chapter 26. If you have a Bible, I just want to show you Ezekiel chapter 26, chapter 27, and chapter 28. Don't worry, we're not going to read those chapters now, but I want to point out to you in the prophet Ezekiel, he gave a lot of time and attention to Tyre. And if you look at chapter 27 is a lament over Tyre. And there the prophet Ezekiel describes this great trading city, this Phoenician trading city was just up on the coast north of Israel, in a very strategic island position next to the mainland. Tyre was the key trader on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. And he gives a whole 3 chapters about Tyre and its judgment, but he gives the sort of parable prophecy in chapter 27 of Tyre and her wealth and her prestige and her prosperity like a ship. He explains to her that she's like a majestic ship, and she's got all the nations of the world that are serving her and coming to her, waiting upon her, involved in her business. It's like a glorious seafaring commercial ship. And then suddenly in chapter 27, if you look at verse 28, it says there, "But an east wind will break you to pieces far out to sea. Your wealth, merchandise, wares, your mariners, sailors, shipwrights, your merchants and all your soldiers will sink into the heart of the sea on the day of your shipwreck." And that, if you read Ezekiel, it's a bit like what's happening here. Of Babylon is suddenly falling. It's as though God has pulled the plug on the city of Babylon. You know, when you have a bath, if some of you have a bath, you just pull the plug and it all goes down. This is what God is doing to Babylon, just like happened to Tyre. Suddenly that glorious ship just sunk, down it goes. And everything that was once so wonderful and had the attention of people is over in an instant. And this is the theme of chapter 18. I'll repeat that, the sudden and severe demise of this great city. And so when you're reading these prophecies of Ezekiel and these prophecies of the Old Testament, you can know that they're also pointing forward prophetically to Revelation chapter 18. And that's why studying Revelation is helpful to us in trying to understand the Old Testament, because those Old Testament prophecies point beyond their immediate fulfillment to something far greater. And that is what we believe, this world city of Babylon that we have in Revelation chapter 17 and Revelation chapter 18. So that's why I give you those background scriptures, that you can have a look at them and to be able to compare the scriptures with the scriptures and see how the Old Testament types are fulfilled in what's happening within the New Testament time period. So in John's day, we said last week, John's day, it was pertinent for him when he read, and as we will see here in this particular chapter, when people are called to leave Babylon. In John's day, the Babylon in John's day was clearly the Roman Empire that traded on the seas. It was the desire of all the nations, and it was giving great wealth, unprecedented wealth to all the kingdoms around the Mediterranean, or the region which is called the Levant, which is the eastern area of the Mediterranean world. It was bringing unprecedented wealth and opportunity. Everybody could be more upwardly mobile in life. And 2 chapters are dealing with, for John's readers, the prosperity, the allurements of Rome, and now in this chapter, the judgment on Rome. So even though I'm not going to answer all your questions and exactly what's going to be happening here, we do need to know that this Babylon city, this prostitute, is very important to God, and he considers it so important that he's going to give a whole long chapter related to the impact of her fall and the aftershock upon the world. What can we relate Babylon today? Well, you see, today there's no one city, is there, in one sense? One way I think that you can get close to understanding what Babylon was like for John's first day, if you consider the great fact of Amazon on the internet today. If you consider Amazon, I mean, you can buy anything. Amazon offers all people around the world. It's a great sort of mecca, isn't it? where you can buy things, and you have access to materials or books or paintbrushes if you're a specialist, or whatever it might be. You can get nearly anything you want on Amazon. So for John's day, Rome was a bit like that. Rome was the trading center. And for our day, well, we might not be able to identify a city, but we've got to be aware that Babylon is still present in all the different forms within the world that we live. The city, the human city that is put together by people without God. Collective human society that establishes itself and operates itself apart from the values and apart from the fear of God. Human nature congregating and forming itself in a social entity apart from God is really effectively what Babylon is all about. And so we don't necessarily, and we don't know what happens in the world, to think of one city, but we can think of organized society which is particularly materialistic. This is really what Babylon is all about. The writer David Pawson said what was wrong with Babylon is that Babylon had materialism without morality. It was materialism without morality, pleasure without purity. And it was wealth without wisdom. I think that's very accurate in coming to assess what's happening. Let me repeat that to you. It's all in my notes. Materialism without morality, pleasure without purity, and wealth without wisdom. This is what's portrayed in this great city. And in this great city, all of the 10 commandments are despised and broken in this great city of man, which was happening in John's day, in the city of Rome. I mean, you can go through all the 10 commandments. Remember, the first commandment is you have no other gods. Rome doesn't matter who you worship, all the other gods are welcome in Babylon. The second commandment, that you mustn't have any graven image, and we know that a lot of the business in Rome was sort of idolatry and related to the idol worship of people of the day and their beliefs about themselves. God's name was certainly taken in vain in Rome, the true God in his name, and we think of the beast and all the blasphemies. Certainly the matter of the Sabbath doesn't seem to be something which was happening. It was just business at any cost. Honoring your mother and your father. You see, the problem that starts to happen in cities is that the family units started to break up because there were a whole lot of new types of relationships. And it's always been challenging as people have got more and more used to living in big cities. The family unit tends to suffer a lot. There is lots of murder. We'll see this in the city. That's the 6th commandment. Murder, adultery, stealing, bearing false witness, and of course the last commandment about coveting. And we'll see in this particular chapter, well, this is why people do business with her, because they want what everybody else has got, and they crave for a better life and for more material goods. So this is what's described here in this great woman. She's described here, as we get into some of the detail, as her fall takes place. And let's just remember as well that as it's presented to us here, this great city falls severely and suddenly before the coming of Christ. It's not Christ who destroys Babylon. It's the animal that she rides that destroys Babylon. So he's going to, as I intimated last week, the goal is for him to take control after she has been destroyed. But God will bring it about somehow before the coming of Christ, and this will have the aftershock of great lamentation. And this particular chapter as well gives it's almost, this chapter is the New Testament equivalent of the book of Lamentations. You might know the book of Lamentations. Don't know, maybe in certain times of your life you've at times of great loss or hardship. But Lamentations is a dirge, is a funeral lament after the fall of Jerusalem. Chapter 18 in Revelation is the funeral lament of the fall of the great city of man, the city Babylon. And so we have in this chapter the three main, I'll point them out to you, the three main dirge singers or lamenters that are presented here. And we'll have a look at them as they... So let's have a look at this chapter. Just try to be focusing on some of the detail here. So let's read from chapter 18 from verse 1, and I'll read to verse 5 or so. After these things I saw another angel descend from heaven, and having great authority. The earth was illumined with his splendor, and he called out in a mighty voice, announcing, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a home for demons, and a hold for every unclean spirit, a holding place for every unclean bird, and a hold for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the strong passion of her sexual immorality. The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become wealthy from the power of her luxuries." And I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you may not participate in her sins and receive some of her plagues. For her sins have amassed high as heaven, and God has remembered her crimes." This section opens, chapter 18 opens, and chapter 18 closes with an angelic announcement. If you go right to the end, you can see verse 21. There was a powerful angel. From 21 to the end there speaks about of the chapter. A powerful angel comes down and he throws a large millstone to the sea, which just goes to the bottom of the sea. So this section begins with an angel coming down, a mighty angel, then ends with a mighty angel. We've seen that in the book of Revelation. For the readers and the listeners of this who originally received that, the issue was not about, well, whether angels exist or what, but for them it was very clear. Angels were emissaries, or angels were representatives who had come with something to announce or to declare something. Angels weren't just cute things that you... Well, it'd be nice to see an angel. If you had an angel appear to you, it's probably to tell you something of importance. Some preachers said, if you have an angel appear to you, you won't take a picture and put it on your fridge. If you have an angel appear to you, you'll wet your pants. That's what will happen. Because angels are august. This is an encounter with a messenger from heaven. They've come to tell you something, or whatever it is. Hopefully not to tell you how long you've got to live. So for them, angels were bringing something from God, and so these great angels come down, and they're going to tell the audience that actually the animal and this great world city, they are not the ones that have the final say. God is going to bring about great change, and he's going to bring about it suddenly, because heaven rules this world. He allows people and institutions, he allows things to go on their own, and he allows even this great city Babylon to get bigger and bigger, and to take the moral life out of people in all their prostitution. He allows things to go, but then the end will come, and suddenly he steps in. An angel comes and is going to say, God has decided things are about to change. And so this first angel pronounces the main theme, and this pronounces that Babylon is fallen. It's an announcement that is telling John what's about to happen, or just has happened, but it's saying that it's over for Babylon. She has fallen. She's Babylon the Great, but it's going to be over in an instant. This was quite surprising about Babylon in human history. If you study Nebuchadnezzar, you know, Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon the Great and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, it was over quite quickly for his rule and for his glory. Just one or two of his sons, and then the Persians came and took over everything. And you can read in the Greek historian Herodotus, I think it's Herodotus, and he describes how Cyrus the Great managed to take the city of Babylon by blocking the waters of the Euphrates. And he came then in the waterbeds and got into Babylon very, very easily. It was over quite quickly, almost in an instant, the glory of Babylon. And this happened with Tyre. It was things were over quite quickly. And so we have this message here that things can change when it's God's time. Although this great city seems invincible and ruling and nothing can change this, an angel comes out and says it's going to all change. And this, what does he announce? He announces that the city is going to fall. It's going to be the end of it suddenly and severely. And that the city is going to be a zoo. It's going to turn into a zoo. What sort of zoo is it going to be? It's going to be a place where demonic spirits are going to be living. Every unclean spirit, unclean bird, unclean animal, they were used, unclean animals or unclean birds, not talking about the literal bird, but they were symbols of the demonic. And so this city is going to be emptied out of all its wealth. It'll be a revolting place where nobody will want to go to. It'll be a place where all these unclean animals live, and no human will want to go. The total reversal of what has happened in the previous chapter, with all the nations are going there, and now there's just going to be darkness and emptiness. And she's going to be a place of perpetual destruction. It's really also here, we'll see later, a bit of a symbol of hell, of this demonic presence. And that's what the demons are, certainly in the Bible, that demons are there that hate human nature and prey upon it and exploit and use humans and bring about destruction for our humanity. And these animals are going to be the animals that are going to live in that particular place. Why is this happening? I think it's verse 3, I'm not sure. But you might notice in your Bible that there's the word for. Just see if does the NIV have that? Verse 3. For. And this little word for occurs throughout this particular chapter by giving us reasons. It's a very important word. Reasons why Babylon is going to be fallen. It will fall, and why God's judgment will come upon her. And the first four he explains, and these are the main players of this particular chapter. He says, why is she falling? Because the nations have become drunk on the wine of the strong passion of her sexual immorality. She is intoxicating and leading the nations astray. The kings of the earth also are committing sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become wealthy from the power of her luxuries. Now you see, of course, what Babylon offered to people was this, and what they were intoxicating with, as we have seen last week, was worldly prosperity. Worldly prosperity, but at the cost of personal things and at the cost of a personal God. She was offering the greatest good what she was giving to people would be materialism and prosperity. This is what she offered to people as the final world city. But it was inherently and morally corrupt, what she was offering. Because at the end of the day, she was deceiving and intoxicating people, and kings betrayed their values because of her, betrayed their people. And the reason is because this is what really the human sin was all about. Human sin, right from the first sin of Adam and Eve, is that people have preferred have preferred other things to God, have put other things in place of God. Whether it is wisdom, whether it is security, whether it is love, whether it is money, whatever it might be. Jesus called it mammon. And humans have betrayed their love for God, or have not loved God for the sake of loving other things. And this is the deceitfulness that Babylon was pumping out, this deceit for people, making people want these things more than anything else in their whole life. This is, I think, what the drunkenness and the stupor is, because this is what sin does. It makes us drunk. It makes us confused. It makes us almost want earth to heaven instead of eternal life, and instead of the glory of God, we'd rather have the things of the earth if we had to compare them with one another. Or in Romans chapter 1, it's very clear that the human race will rather want the wrappings of creation than the gift of God himself. This is the drunkenness that is upon the world. Wouldn't you consider somebody drunk? Imagine if you wrapped for them some priceless gift, or a diamond ring that is priceless, and you put this diamond ring in a lovely case and in lovely beautiful wrapping that was appropriate, and you had to give it to your lover or somebody special, and they receive it, and they are so taken with the wrapping, and they're so taken with the casket in which within the diamond is in, that they fall in love with that and not the diamond or the ring. You would think that they are drunk. That's nothing compared to what this is worth, the diamond ring. This is what humans have done. We've preferred the wrappings of the world, the gift wrap of the world that God has wrapped himself in. The beautiful creation out there today, the birds and all the good things of life, which are good. Enjoying food and taste and the pleasures. There's nothing wrong in itself. But the drunkenness of the human race is when we enjoy it, we don't thank the giver. We don't actually realize that there's someone who's given this to us, and he's far more valuable and far more beautiful than anything that we've ever experienced. We've sold God at the cost of his gifts. This is a strange drunkenness that has come upon the human race that Romans chapter 1 tells us about. And so these people, these great benefactors, the nations, the kings, the merchants that we have here, God has had enough because they're leading people astray, and he's now bringing things to a sudden and severe end. Then in chapter 4 we have this voice speaking. Verse 4. I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you may not participate in her sins and receive some of her plagues. For her sins have amassed as high as heaven, and God has remembered her crimes." This appeal at the beginning of this chapter to God's people is matched by something at the end. If you go to the end of the chapter and you look at verse 20. Verse 20 speaks about rejoice over her heaven, and rejoice, saints and apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she gave you. So God's people are addressed in this particular chapter towards the beginning, in the sense of they must, with the clear command that they must come out, and at the end with the command that they must rejoice over her fall, because it's a time when truth will be restored, now that her intoxicating influences to deceive people will be put to an end. So God's people. So we have, you see what's happening in this chapter. Begins with angels, the beginning and the end. The next level in is referring to, it's speaking to God's people, and then it's going to be the heart of the main message, which will be inside those two groups, which are the beginning at the end of this particular section. So the voice that is speaking here, if you have, any of you have a red letter Bible with you, I wonder, you know what red letter Bible is?
Jesus.
Is yeah. Get going here. Some of the red, any of you have a red letter? I have one here. The question here, it's just stopped. Let me make sure that they're coming on here. The question here is, who's speaking here in this section?
Red is when Jesus speaks.
Yeah, they do that. When Jesus is speaking, they have the words in red. But verse 4, who's speaking there, I wonder?
A voice from heaven, but it doesn't tell us.
It says a voice from heaven speaks,
The angels.
and then it says, come out of her, my people.
So there's a red one.
God or
So
Come
Christ-
out of her, my people.
So Christ speaks.
And so verse 4 says, come out of her, my people. Now, my people was obviously could be referring to God or Christ. Verse 5 speaks about God as a third party, as that God has remembered. And verse 6, somebody speaking to God about paying her back for what she has done. But if verse 4 in your Bible is, and I've put this in my translation, if this is Jesus speaking, then the words here go all the way up to, these words go, of this voice speaking, go all the way up to verse 20. And the older NIV, I think, doesn't put a change after verse 9. You see verse 9, it speaks about when the kings, we don't know who's speaking there. It doesn't tell you who's speaking. Most people think from verse 4 to verse 20, or rather from verse 4 to verses 8, people think that might be an angel speaking on behalf of God, something like that. But I take from verse 4 to verse 20 actually to be Christ's voice speaking and telling about this great destruction. And he's speaking about God's judgment, various things of that nature. I might be wrong. There might be a better way of understanding it. But it's the my people of verse 4 that is, I think, quite striking. That it's going to be speaking here. So there's a call here. If this is the voice of Christ to come out of Babylon, let me first remind you, when we receive something like this, in reading any book of the Bible, we need to know who is the original audience that this is speaking to. So we do know from Revelation chapter, right in the beginning, that this is a letter to the 7 churches. Clearly, the people in Ephesus, Smyrna, Laodicea, they were called to come out of Babylon, weren't they? This applies to them first, before any future generation. So Babylon, again, this shows that Babylon must have been Rome in the 1st century time. And to future readers of the book, we've got to try and think about what is Babylon in our day, and how do we come out of her? Because this is what must take place. There's a call to come out of her before she is destroyed. Obviously, there's no need to come out of her when she is destroyed. But this is a call to God's people to come out of her, that you might not share in her sins. Does that mean, and would that have meant for people in the first century world, that they had to leave Rome? I mean, probably not. If people were living, if they were reading this in Rome and it says, come out of her, and they feel that we're in Rome, let's pack our bags and let's leave here. Is that what this is calling for? Particularly for the first century readers? Well, I don't think it's talking about a physical departure or geographical departure from a city. I think what is called here is a moral departure. It's a moral departure from out of a world system that is corrupt and intoxicating and fulfilling what Rome is, what this is telling us about here. It's some sort of moral departure. And this moral departure from Babylon has not actually been just for John's day. If you go right back in biblical history, God's people have always been moving out of Babylon. Right from Abraham, when he left the Babylonian region, right from the exiles when they came out of Babylon and were restored to their own land, etc. God's people have always had to be wary of the spirit of the world, the love of the world, and the things that are in the world, and all that glitters and can get us caught up in the values and the thinking that Mammon and Babylon represent. One of the Old Testament times, and this is quite true, remember when Achan went in, the soldier Achan was fighting on the walls of Jericho when they went under Joshua, and Achan was a soldier and he marched around the walls of the city of Jericho, fell. They went straight in. Achan was busy mopping up inside, and what did he see? He saw a Babylonian garment, and he betrayed the nation, and he betrayed faithfulness to God and what God had said. They mustn't take anything. Sometimes they could have, but then God said, you mustn't touch anything. And Achan did touch that Babylonian garment. And so in biblical history, this call morally to come out has been a very important part of things. For Christians to keep themselves unstained from the world. And we have to do that more vigilantly today because of our proximity to Babylon through media, things of that nature, let alone just what's around us in the cities. We have to know, what does it mean to come out of her? Not a geographical thing, but something which is morally that we've got to do. One of the big issues in the early church, which probably related to this, which you might not be familiar with, was, can a Christian serve in the army? In the Roman army? Could a Christian serve in the Roman army? Now, Christians were quite divided over that. Some Christians felt that they could serve in the Roman army in the second century. Let's take the second century. Some people felt that they could maybe not do certain rituals, but they could still faithfully look after the empire and be a soldier. Other Christians felt that actually you can't be, because you had to march under the banner of gods, and the soldiers went in and did immoral things and murder and killing and rape and plunder. That's what just soldiers did, that sort of thing. So a Christian couldn't comply with that. And Christians were divided. And some felt that actually to come out of Babylon meant doing that, meant actually not being a soldier. So sometimes your moral choices will affect your lifestyle and the type of work you are involved with. Or maybe if you're part of a business that's very much operating on the lines just to make a profit, the bottom line, couldn't care about human beings, about human relationships, and about the things of God or values. You might find that you can work there so far but no further. And you might not accept a promotion because there's just too much corruption, and you can only serve God with a clear conscience. So coming out of her needs to be something that all Christians think about in terms of how we serve Him with our values. In the last few minutes that are left, I'm not going to go through everything, but I want to move on from this chapter. I can send you my notes. The sections here from verse 9, if you look at verse 9, there are three benefactors that are pointed out here for attention. Verse 9, we have the kings of the earth. Verse 11, we have the merchants of the earth. And verse 17, we have the shipmasters or captains, seafarers and sailors. These three groups, verse 9, the kings, verse 11, the merchants, and 17, the shipmasters, are now going to be put here as people in this aftershock of the fall of this great city. They're going to take up their stand and they're going to sing this dirge over the great city that has been their benefactor. She has given them business. She has blessed their lives economically. They've got their upward mobility and their advancement in life. She's given them business and they've grown wealthy on that. With her fall, their world has come to an end. And so the kings, the merchants and the shipmasters, each of them sing this dirge or funeral song. How terrible for the great city. For in a single hour your judgment has come. Then in verse 16 again, how terrible. For in a single hour your wealth is laid waste. Then verse 19, how terrible. For in a single hour she was made desolate. These mourners sing over her, and we could picture them like Lot. Remember Lot and his wife didn't make it all the way out there, but Lot and his two daughters. When Sodom and Gomorrah, the time had come for Sodom and Gomorrah's fall. In a single hour, Sodom and Gomorrah's judgment came. And you can imagine Lot just escaping and being on the side, standing far off and singing the funeral song. This is what's happening in this particular chapter. These traders and kings and the couriers, the people on the ships, they are mourning because it's all come to an end, their great business. If you look at verses 11 to verses 14, all their cargo, the merchants, verses 11, all their cargoes, their gold, their silver, their precious stones and pearls and fine linen, purple cloth, silk and scarlet, citron wood, articles of ivory, articles made of costly wood, bronze and iron and marble, merchandise of cinnamon, spice, incense, perfumes, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat and cattle and sheep and horses, chariots, and human bodies, that's slaves, that is the lives of men. Those are the wares that the tradesmen and businessmen did their business with, including slavery. So this is all coming to an end. It's quite a list. It's a bit like if you were at the Roman port of Ostia. Rome had a port city called Ostia. It's like a bill of sale of all the things that were coming into Rome, all the wares that were flowing up to the great city. We have this list of these things that are mentioned here. This is why Babylon here is presented not as false religion, as I said last week, but Babylon is presented as an economic hub of the world, trading and business. You can see the list of all these items that are being sold. And it's all come to an end with their fall. In other words, their millennium is over. Their millennium is over. Their world's come to an end. All the prosperity is now suddenly over. And the luxury that came with her. So that is really the heart of this chapter, this funeral lament of people who this was their life. She was their life. And she's come to an end. You see, that will be the end. If we haven't got our hope and our focus on eternal things and eternal treasures, temporal treasures which are not designed to have our allegiance and our love, will always at the end of the day bring about great lament and great disappointment. But Christians are certainly people that have their hearts set on things beyond this life. We use things of the world, but we have our hopes and our life set on things that are beyond this world. Somebody said that righteous people use money and love people, but wicked people do the opposite. They use people and love money. And that's just a simple summary of what's happening in this chapter. All that is in this chapter it's about people who are using people because they love the wealth that she brings. The righteous people operate on a different level. We use money, but we love people. Then lastly, there is these last few words here of the angel. From verse 21. Once again speaking of the fall of Babylon, and it provides a very descriptive account of how the lights will be turned off of the city. She'll become a city of darkness. It speaks about the human entertainment and crafts and industry, the normal activities of life. Look here what it says, verse 22 or so. The music of harpists, musicians, flautists, trumpeters will never be heard in you again. Every craftsman of every skill will never be found in you again. The sound of the mill will never be heard in you again. The light of the lamp will never shine in you again. Happy voices of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. For your merchants were the magnates of the world, for all the nations were led astray by your sorcery. Indeed, it was in her that was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all the slaughtered that are on the earth. This is an unparalleled description of fine culture and murder mixed together, of an elite, a wonderful culture, all these wonderful things, crafts and entertainment and music and industry, the sound of the mill, the light of the lamp, the warmth of homes and the good things that life brings us, marriage, the happy voices of bride and bridegroom, all the good things in the city, all the good culture. But that last verse brings a dimension into this, that wonderful culture also has human blood mixed in with everything. Because in this city, at the end of the day, people don't care about one another. People don't really care about other people. It's about the dolce vita, or the good life. That is the main objective, and humans are just used in some way of getting there. I write in my notes and say it's as though the front door of this city of Babylon is glorious and it's beautiful and ornate and splendid and majestic, and it's such a wonderful city to go into and be a part of, but you don't know that the back door has blood flowing out of it to the back. And that juxtapositioning, that contrast between the beautiful fine culture, the hanging gardens of Babylon, these glorious cities of the world, the glory of Rome, but Rome was also a city of blood in many ways. You know, the gladiators and the way that life was cheap. And John ends with this striking parallel between these two things. We will see later that it's actually the bride city. The bride city has the river of life flowing out of her. She gives life. But this city has blood flowing out of her. Now, we know that today, because some of the most refined and cultured centers of power can also be those which don't care about human life. And the most glaring thing is abortion, isn't it? What people think about humans before they are born. And some of the most educated and wealthy people couldn't really care about, or they don't even think it's just bodily tissue and all those issues. And the world's of course up in arms with a virus that is maybe threatening 0.5% of the human race, but doesn't blink an eyelid at the murder of the unborn, or and beyond that, all the other injustices that happen in our world. And this great city is ultimately here a city of blood. And it says that in this city is found the blood of Christians and of all those who are slaughtered on the earth. What a last line for this Babylon city. Not just martyrs and Christian martyrs, but of all those who are slaughtered on the earth. And this is why it's difficult to believe that this is referring to a literal city, because where in one city is all the blood of people slaughtered? No, one city can't do that. This is the apostate society of human beings who've coming to their pinnacle of culture and wealth, and it's showing to us that it might look wonderful in the eyes of human beings, but in God's sight she's a murderous woman, because she has that cup of blood which she's drinking that we saw in the beginning of last chapter. This is a shocking end to this description of the city, and certainly something that we've all got to ponder and think about as we know that yes, Babylon was there in John's day. She's here in our day in a mysterious way, because she is a mystery. Previous chapter said it's a mystery. She's here in our day. She will be in her consummate form in history before Jesus returns, but she will come to a sudden and severe end before Jesus returns. But we today have to come out of her, that we don't get singed by the flames of God's judgment, and keep our garments clean, because at the end of the day, what she stands for is totally opposite to what Christians stand for, where we use money, we use the things of the world for God and for people, and we do not do the opposite. But how easy, the New Testament is full of those warnings, isn't it? How easy is it for Christians to take on the spirit of the world and to get poisoned by and to be seduced by the seductions of this flirtatious prostitute who is Babylon the Great. So that's this chapter for today. Let's think about these things. It's an unusual chapter. where we've, certainly in the New Testament, not had such a list of all the wares of Rome that was going to Rome. And we need to think about it, think about our life, how we live, our values. It's so easy just to get caught up into the values of the world around us. Christians march to a different drum. We move to different music from those of people who do not know the true and the living God. Next week, we're going to be looking at the fourfold hallelujah, because this precipitates, the fall of Babylon precipitates, after the lamentation, a great celebration that this great city has fallen. And we'll see that. And then in 2 weeks' time, we might have a break, but I'm not sure. But we have a major break in Revelation when we come now to the rider on the white horse and the coming of Christ in great power and great glory. Well, any questions here? We might have a few minutes to people on Zoom, so let me just say thank you for joining us. I'm not going to close the Zoom platform, but you'll just, when it goes off, I'm not sure, in a few minutes. But I normally take a few questions of people here, and if anybody has any questions, and if there's anybody on the internet, can't see everybody at one glance, but there might be somebody who has a question there. Yes, there's somebody here who has a question.
Yeah,
I'll repeat it for people here.
The idea that the city is spiritual also, is it not also reflected in even in the old institutions of Moses, where the Hittefeest, or whatever that's in English, was instituted to get people to, move out of their houses and go and stay in the huts for a week.
Oh, tabernacles, yes.
Tabernacles
Yes.
there, and they were called to move out of their houses and
Yes.
show that they were brought out of Egypt, which you
Yes.
could also say maybe is Babylon, or they
Yes.
were called out
Yes.
of Babylon. And they were
Yes.
called out of their
Good,
crafts and
yes.
work. And you can even take that further. I mean, I thought when I got that step, I took the other step, that
Yes.
every seventh year they were called to
Go
just
back.
live off the land,
Yes.
not plant anything.
Yes.
They would just live of the 6 years
Yes.
abundance
So-
that God will provide.
So it's been pointed out here that within Israel, God on an annual basis wanted people to leave their homes and to go and live in a tent again, and just to get in touch with where they've come from as people, as certainly as God's people. And that was one way that God was trying to show them, certainly, that He Himself is their greatest good. Because in Deuteronomy 8 it does say, when you come into the promised land and you have cisterns which are dug and the buildings and your vineyards, be careful that you don't forget me. And we know that with Jesus, it was the wilderness time that was a time of testing, when they had to be taken through times of barrenness, when it was proven to them. And that's where the holiness of dying, the holiness of dying, and we maybe don't make as much of this as previous Christians did, that they saw the dying process as a time of purging, of preparation for coming to the presence of God, when you actually are faced with the full reality that you can't take anything with you, that you've just got to say goodbye, and you've got to just be in your mortal birthday suit, realizing that you've brought nothing into the world and you'll take nothing, and there's a time just to cleanse your thoughts and to prepare yourself. And you'll find that you'll be in a better frame of mind. If only we could do that sort of thing when we are in the press and the thrust of life as we're living. But a good point on Israel, having to go back to living in tabernacles, leaving the city, going to live in tents. There's something there that God was trying to communicate with them. Is there anybody here on the internet? You can press something that maybe will get a hand to go up, and I might be able to see that. All right. Well, thank you. food for thought, and more than that, food for the soul in this. And may God bless His word in your life this day. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. All right, well, no more questions from anybody
Yes,
here?
this bit,
Yes.
and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints. Now, presume I would have thought those prophets and saints were not falling foul of all the what was going on elsewhere. I mean, they would have been. Wouldn't the prophets and the saints have been people resisting all the temptations?
And I'd say because they're resisting, they're obviously opposed
Yeah, opposed to it.
to them, and she's opposing them because they're calling her back to, they're obviously preaching in her and calling and being her true witnesses. If you go to chapter 11 verse 8, you'll see, remember the two witnesses,
Yes.
and then they get killed. The two witnesses are killed, and people celebrate and party because they've got rid of those people. I think
So
that's
it's their
linked to,
blood. It's actually because they've been massacred
yes,
in
In-
opposing her.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Losing the
She's
life.
been intolerant. And this is the thing that we realize we can see where society can go even today with the greater intolerance. Rome did become more intolerant of those who weren't moving to her rhythm.
Mm.
And Christians were certainly feeling the effect of that. And likewise today, more and more intolerance towards values that Christians hold. That's seen as bigoted and insensitive and judgmental, etc. And for us just to keep our own values is getting harder and harder.
This disappearance of the city, verse 21. 21, yeah.
How the city disappears.
Yeah, is that a spiritual thing as well? Is it beeldspraak? Is not. I mean, Rome is still there. The city
Yes.
of Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar was, I think there's still a city today. So it's
Yeah, that's-
more a figuratively speaking.
A lot of the prophecies towards Babylon in the Old Testament were never took place. Babylon didn't fall suddenly, like in the old, like some
Yeah,
prophecies were.
Isaiah 51, I think, is quite a long
Yes,
scripture about it.
but Babylon took slowly by attrition, it slowly sort of faded. So its whole dramatic demise was not fulfilled. I think there's something of the fulfillment of that which is carried over to this Babylon. The point, though, which is clear here, is that the animal destroys the city or society, whatever. He makes an end to her, which,
Right.
as I said last week, is some way that now he can get greater control of the nations and the people. That is not taken. That's obviously a real end time event, which is, I mean, I don't know what that'll look like, how that's going to take place, but it does say that him and these 10 kings will turn upon her and take control in some particular way.
But they're also evil people.
Yes.
So
Well,
it's evil people eating evil people.
Yeah.
yes, yes, because she's being used by in the picture. The beast is carrying her, and she's happy with that because she's getting the attention. I said she's the bait, and but everybody's slowly drawn into the hook. And with her out the way, then this animal has control of everybody else. That is where history is going if we believe Revelation. Exactly when and how, we don't know. So we've just got to live knowing these things wisely, purely, and keep ourselves unstained from these, from the allurements that are presented to us here. All right. I will send you the notes, and don't forget, if you want to, if you can just remind me. I need a lot of reminding. I will send those to you. But otherwise,
Thank
we'll
Thank
close
you.
up now. And thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Did you have to retune in on Zoom, or have you extended your?
No.
Have you had unlimited time now?
He actually did do it, but things are going more smoothly, so he didn't realize when he was actually bringing it out again.
Did it so quietly? Yeah.
But